Tessa needed to hurry, gather water, collect the last of her kindling, and return to her cottage before darkness fell. 3 months in these woods, and still the approaching winter filled her with a quiet, constant fear. Each day grew shorter and colder, each night stretched longer, as if the forest itself was slowly tightening its grip around her. But then a sound drifted over the rushing current of the river, so faint she almost missed it beneath the steady murmur of water. She paused, droplets slipping from her fingers. There it was again, a thin, frightened whimper. Tessa narrowed her eyes against the fading light. Halfway across the swollen river, a fallen log had caught between rocks, forming a small, unstable island in the churning water. On top of it, a dark shape trembled. A wolf pup, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its soaked fur clinging tightly to its fragile body. As she watched, it tried to stand, its paw slipping against the slick bark. It stumbled, nearly falling into the current before catching itself at the last second. Another weak cry carried across the water. "Where is your mother?" Tessa whispered, scanning the opposite shore. The forest stood silent, offering no answer, no sign of any adult wolves nearby. Just the pup, alone, as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The sensible choice was obvious. Turn away, return to her shelter. She barely had enough food for herself. Winter would already be merciless without adding another mouth to feed. The wolves of this forest were not her concern. And yet she remained where she stood, watching as the pup's frightened eyes locked onto hers across the water. The log shifted slightly. It wouldn't hold forever. "Foolish girl," Tessa muttered under her breath, already bending to untie her boots. She set them carefully on the bank beside her water skin. Her cloak followed, folded quickly to keep it dry. The shock of the cold water stole the air from her lungs the moment she stepped in. The river, fed by mountain snowmelt, numbed her feet instantly, then her legs as she waded deeper. Her skirt grew heavy, dragging against her movements, resisting every step. "Stay," she called to the pup, though she knew it couldn't understand. "Don't move." The stones beneath her feet turned slippery, the current growing stronger as she pushed forward. Halfway across, the water reached her waist, pulling at her with steady force. One wrong step and she would be swept away, lost to the same current threatening the small creature ahead. The log shifted again. The pup whimpered louder, its tiny claws scraping helplessly against the bark. "Almost there," Tessa gasped, each breath sharp and uneven. 3 more steps. 2. Her fingers brushed against the rough surface of the log, then closed tightly around its edge. The pup shrank back, baring tiny teeth in fear. "I won't hurt you," she whispered softly. "Let me help." Something in her voice, or perhaps its own desperation, made the pup freeze as she reached out. Its body was shockingly light when she lifted it, a trembling bundle of wet fur and fragile limbs. She pulled it close against her chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat racing against her own. The return felt longer, harder, the current stronger and her legs weaker with every step. When her foot finally found the muddy bank, relief washed over her, quickly followed by the realization that the rain had begun to fall in earnest. Tessa gathered her belongings with one arm while holding the pup securely with the other. Blood streaked across her skin where its paw had been cut, likely on sharp rock. "You're safe," she murmured, wrapping her cloak around them both. "I have a fire waiting. Food, not much, but enough." The pup pressed closer, seeking warmth as she began to walk. For the first time in months, the weight of another living being against her chest eased the heavy isolation she had grown used to. Lightning split the darkening sky, briefly illuminating the forest around her. In that flash, something in the shadows seemed to move, not wind, not branches, but something else entirely. When darkness returned, only the sound of rain on leaves remained, along with the soft breathing of the creature in her arms. Tessa quickened her pace, unaware that her small act of mercy had not gone unseen. Tessa dropped instantly behind a fallen log, pressing her body against the freezing bark as if she could disappear into it. Through the narrow gaps in the deadwood, she saw them. 3 men dressed in the unmistakable crimson and gold of King Sohan's royal guard. Her heart slammed violently against her ribs. 3 months. 3 months she had stayed hidden, and still he was hunting her. "Sir, look there." One of the guards pointed toward the patch of disturbed snow where she had been digging moments before. Someone was just here. The leader stepped forward, crouching low as he examined the freshly turned earth. His gloved hand reached out, lifting her forgotten herb pouch. He paused, then said quietly, "Still warm, she's close." Tessa clamped a hand over her mouth, forcing back the sound rising in her throat. They weren't passing through, they were tracking her. Sent for her. The third guard suddenly bent down, studying the ground, then straightened sharply. "Tracks," he called out. "This way." His finger traced the line of footprints leading directly toward her hiding place. There was no more time. No more hiding. Tessa burst from behind the log, the sudden movement startling the men as she turned and ran. Snow dragged at her legs, each step heavy and slow. "There! It's her, Lady Tessa." The guards crashed through the trees behind her, closing the distance with terrifying speed. She couldn't let them reach her cabin. It was everything, her only shelter, her only chance to survive the winter. The river, if she could reach the river, cross where the ice held strong, maybe she could lose them. She veered sharply, heading toward the distant roar of water. Just a few more steps, then her foot plunged into hidden snow, twisting violently into a rabbit hole. Pain exploded up her leg as she fell hard into the snow. Before she could even breathe, hands seized her arms, dragging her upright. "Lady Tessa of House Mercer," one of them said formally, his grip unyielding. "By order of His Majesty, King Sohan, you are to return to the palace and fulfill your marriage vows." "No." Panic tore through her voice. "He'll kill me, just like the others." "You know he will." The guards exchanged brief, uneasy glances, but their grip did not loosen. "We have our orders, my lady," the leader replied coldly. "The king wants his bride returned, unharmed." "For how long?" Tessa demanded, struggling against them. "Until I bear him a child. Until I'm no longer useful. Please, have mercy." "We're just following orders," another muttered. They began dragging her back through the forest, her injured ankle screaming with every step, tears freezing against her skin. Then, a low, deep growl rolled through the air. All three men froze. On the riverbank stood the massive black wolf. Snow melted beneath its paws, steam rising faintly from its body. Its lips curled back, revealing teeth meant to tear flesh apart. "Wolf," the leader shouted, shoving Tessa aside as he drew his sword. "Stand back." The beast moved. Not like an animal, faster. Too fast. A blur of black against white. The guard barely had time to react before the wolf struck, jaws snapping shut around his arm with a sickening crack. The others released Tessa, scrambling for their weapons, but it didn't matter. The wolf tore through them with brutal precision. Swift, calculated, unstoppable. One guard broke first, fleeing into the trees with a terrified scream. The leader staggered back, clutching his shattered arm. "Demon," he gasped, stumbling away. "We'll return, with silver and fire." Then they were gone, leaving behind only blood staining the snow. Silence fell again. The wolf stood there, breathing heavily, steam rising from its muzzle. Blood dripped slowly from its jaws onto the white ground. Then, slowly, it turned toward Tessa. Those golden eyes locked onto hers. And in that moment, she understood. This was no ordinary creature. Not just predator. Not just beast. Something older. Something far more dangerous. Tessa couldn't run. Couldn't fight. She could only stand there as it approached. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't eat me." The air around the wolf shimmered, like heat rising from stone. Its body shifted. Changed. Fur withdrew, limbs stretched, bones reshaped beneath skin. And where the wolf had stood, a man now stood. Tall. Powerful. Bare against the cold. Tessa turned her face away instinctively, then found herself looking back, unable to stop. In daylight, he was even more unreal. Muscle and scars, strength carved into human form. That strange pendant resting against his chest. He stepped closer, each movement slow, deliberate. Like a hunter approaching something that couldn't escape. "Thank you," Tessa whispered, her voice unsteady. For saving me. He tilted his head slightly, studying her, listening, but not answering. A smear of blood still marked his lip. Can you understand me? She asked. No reply. Only those eyes narrowing slightly. Do you have a name? She tried again. Still nothing. He stepped closer, then slowly knelt before her in the snow, as if the cold meant nothing to him. His gaze dropped briefly to her ankle, then returned to her face. He reached out, pausing just before touching her. His fingers, still stained with blood, looked dangerous, yet controlled. It's not broken, she said quickly. Just twisted. I can. Before she could finish, he lifted her. Effortlessly. As if she weighed nothing at all. Tessa gasped, grabbing his shoulders for balance. Her fingers met warm skin stretched over solid muscle, and she froze. Wait, she protested weakly. I can walk. He silenced her with a single look. Not cruel. Not angry. Just absolute. He had decided. And that was the end of it. As he began to walk, she became painfully aware of how close they were, her body pressed against his bare chest, heat spreading across her face and downward. No one had ever held her like this. Not her distant father. Not the men at court who had barely touched her hand. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could feel it. What did he see when he looked at her like that? Prey. Curiosity. Something else entirely. The forest closed around them, silent and watchful. Predator and prey. Savior and captive. Bound together in something she did not understand, something that had already begun to change everything. When the warmth of his mouth moved higher, brushing the pulse point at her throat, awareness struck her all at once. No, she gasped, pulling back sharply. We can't, this isn't proper. Khan straightened slowly, his head tilting as a faint smile touched his lips, not mocking, but quietly amused, as if her protest intrigued him. Proper, he repeated, the word unfamiliar, almost foreign in his voice. His eyes never left hers as he reached for her wrist again, his grip firm yet controlled. Khan, she warned, though even she could hear the weakness in her voice. I am a lady of, he silenced her with a single finger pressed gently to her lips. The gesture was so unexpected it stole the rest of her words. There was no apology in his expression, no confusion, only certainty. He didn't understand the rules that bound her, and worse, he didn't accept them. Slowly, deliberately, he turned her wrist upward and pressed his lips against the sensitive skin where her pulse beat fast and unsteady. A small, involuntary sound escaped her, caught somewhere between protest and something far more dangerous. Khan smiled faintly against her skin before lifting his head, something like quiet triumph flickering in his eyes. He had made his point without speaking. Her body betrayed truths her words tried to deny. Flustered and shaken by her own reaction, Tessa pulled her hand back quickly. You mustn't, she began, but the words faltered. To her surprise, Khan laughed, a real laugh this time, deep and warm, nothing like the awkward sounds he had made before. It changed him, softened something, made him seem more human, yet somehow more dangerous because of it. He reached out again, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness, the touch both tender and possessive. Then he rose to his feet in one smooth motion, towering over her in the confined space. Late, he said, the single word carrying meaning far beyond its simplicity. Tessa nodded slowly, relieved for the distance, though something inside her tightened at the thought of him leaving. Yes, it's late. You should go. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression that needed no translation. A promise, a certainty, something inevitable waiting to unfold. Then he disappeared into the night. Tessa stood frozen for a moment before lifting trembling fingers to her wrist, where his lips had touched. Her skin still burned there. 3 months ago, she had fled a king's palace, terrified of what her wedding night would bring. Now, in a quiet forest cabin, she found herself drawn to a man who was more wolf than human, a man who did not ask, only claimed. And what frightened her most was not him, but how close she was to surrendering. 3 days passed after that night. 3 days since his touch, since the promise in his eyes, and he did not return. The first morning, she had felt relief, grateful for space to think. By evening, that relief had faded into unease. By the second day, Unease had become worry. Now, on the third morning, Tessa paced the small cabin, restless and unsettled. "Why should I care?" she muttered, stirring the fire more forcefully than needed. "He's a wild creature. He comes and goes as he pleases." Yet her eyes kept drifting to the window, her body pausing at every sound. When had his presence become something she depended on? When had his absence begun to ache? By midday, heavy snow began to fall, thick and relentless. Her food stores were running low. With a determined breath, she grabbed her cloak. "If the wolf won't bring food, I'll find it myself." She had watched him hunt, studied his movements. She was no longer the sheltered girl she once had been. The forest had changed her. Tessa moved carefully through the snow, following faint rabbit tracks, a crude snare in hand. Then, a sound. A twig snapping. Not beneath her own feet. Somewhere deeper in the forest. She froze. Men. Instinct took over. She climbed quickly into a tall oak, pressing herself against the trunk just as voices drew near. 5 guards emerged below, dressed in the king's colors. Among them, she recognized the same man, his arm now bound tightly where Khan had broken it. Beside him stood an older man, his expression sharper, more dangerous. "I'm telling you, Draven," the injured guard insisted. It wasn't a normal wolf. It was something else. Bigger. Stronger. Eyes like fire. The older man adjusted the crossbow on his back, scanning the forest silently. One of the younger guards laughed nervously. "You're still seeing monsters in your sleep." "It broke my arm in a single bite," Tyson snapped. "And then it turned into a man." The laughter faded. Unease settled over the group. "You hit your head," one muttered weakly. "Believe what you want," Tyson said darkly. "But Draven knows I'm not lying." The older man's gaze remained fixed on the trees. "There are things in these woods older than this kingdom." Silence followed. Then another guard spoke. "Wolf or not, we find the girl. The king is losing patience." "And becoming more dangerous," another added quietly. "What do you think he'll do to her?" someone asked. Tyson gave a cold shrug. "The same thing he did to the others." Fear slid through Tessa like ice. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made it real. Then, "Quiet," Draven said suddenly. "Did you hear that?" Tessa's breath caught. Her foot had shifted. A branch cracked softly beneath her weight. Draven moved instantly, circling the tree until his eyes met hers. "Found her." The others gathered below, looking up. "Come down, princess," Tyson called with a cruel smile. "I am no princess," Tessa shot back, gripping the bark tighter. "She's right," Draven said calmly. "She's a queen." Tyson snorted. "Not for long." "Come down," another guard warned. "Or we cut the tree down." "I'd rather die," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the fear. Tyson drew his sword slowly. "That can be arranged." Then, a howl. Deep. Terrifying. The forest itself seemed to freeze. "No," Tyson whispered, his face draining of color. "Not again." The black wolf burst from the trees like a living shadow, striking before anyone could react. He went straight for Tyson. Bone snapped. Screams followed. Chaos erupted. The wolf moved with terrifying precision, not rage, but calculated violence. 2 men fled. 1 fell. Tyson collapsed, blood spilling into the snow. Only Draven remained standing, crossbow raised. Khan turned toward him, growling low. "So, you lived," Draven said quietly. The wolf tensed. Tessa saw it then, the hidden knife. "Look out," she screamed. But Draven lowered both weapons instead, dropping the blade into the snow. "I spared you once," he said. "I'll do it again. But the king won't." Tessa scrambled down from the tree. Then everything happened at once. Tyson lunged, grabbing the fallen knife. "Khan!" she screamed. Too late. The blade drove deep into his side. A terrible sound tore from him as he turned, ending Tyson instantly. But the damage was done. Khan staggered. The blade glowed faintly green. Poison. Her hands moved on their own, tracing the shape of him, his chest, his shoulders, as if memorizing what she had nearly lost. In the height of that moment, when everything else fell away, she finally allowed herself to speak the truth she had fought for weeks. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. His response was not words, but a low, satisfied growl as his arms tightened around her, pulling her closer. He didn't need language. Everything he felt was already written in the way he held her, in the way his eyes never left hers, in the way his touch claimed and protected all at once. Later, wrapped together beneath blankets near the fire, Tessa drifted toward sleep, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The danger had not vanished, they both knew they would have to leave soon, but for now, for this brief moment, she allowed herself to exist in the warmth of his arms. She was almost asleep when a sound reached her. Soft. Measured. The crunch of footsteps in snow, too controlled to be animal. Khan's body tensed instantly beneath her, alert in a heartbeat. "The king's guards," Tessa whispered, fear surging back. Khan rose without hesitation and moved to the window. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, revealing a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. The cabin was surrounded, not by men, but by wolves. Dozens of them. Massive forms with eyes that glowed in the pale light like silent lanterns. Among them moved figures that shifted, flickering between wolf and human form. And at the center, approaching the door, was Draven. Beside him walked a woman wrapped in heavy furs, her presence commanding, her eyes burning with the same impossible gold as Khan's. Understanding struck Tessa all at once. Her hand found his. "Your people," she whispered. "They've come for you." Morning came cold and clear. Too late. The blade drove deep into his side. A terrible sound tore from him as he turned, ending Tyson instantly. But the damage was done. Khan staggered. The blade glowed faintly green. Poison. Her hands moved on their own, tracing the shape of him, his chest, his shoulders, as if memorizing what she had nearly lost. In the height of that moment, when everything else fell away, she finally allowed herself to speak the truth she had fought for weeks. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. His response was not words, but a low, satisfied growl as his arms tightened around her, pulling her closer. He didn't need language. Everything he felt was already written in the way he held her, in the way his eyes never left hers, in the way his touch claimed and protected all at once. Later, wrapped together beneath blankets near the fire, Tessa drifted toward sleep, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. The danger had not vanished, they both knew they would have to leave soon, but for now, for this brief moment, she allowed herself to exist in the warmth of his arms. She was almost asleep when a sound reached her. Soft. Measured. The crunch of footsteps in snow, too controlled to be animal. Khan's body tensed instantly beneath her, alert in a heartbeat. "The king's guards," Tessa whispered, fear surging back. Khan rose without hesitation and moved to the window. Moonlight spilled across the clearing, revealing a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. The cabin was surrounded, not by men, but by wolves. Dozens of them. Massive forms with eyes that glowed in the pale light like silent lanterns. Among them moved figures that shifted, flickering between wolf and human form. And at the center, approaching the door, was Draven. Beside him walked a woman wrapped in heavy furs, her presence commanding, her eyes burning with the same impossible gold as Khan's. Understanding struck Tessa all at once. Her hand found his. "Your people," she whispered. "They've come for you." Morning came cold and clear. Tessa stood at the edge of a quiet clearing, her cloak pulled tightly around her as she watched the world she knew begin to change. Behind her, Draven spoke quietly with Rhea, the woman who carried authority without effort, Khan's aunt, leader of the Shifter clan who had come to reclaim their lost prince. "A hunting accident," Draven was saying, his voice steady but worn. "The king's runaway bride, lost in the forest. I'll bring back proof enough to satisfy him." Rhea studied him carefully. "And what do you gain from such a lie?" she asked. Draven's answer was simple. "A conscience, perhaps a little less burdened." Tessa turned away, leaving them to their conversation. Her eyes moved instead to the forest's edge. There stood Khan, in his wolf form, surrounded by his pack. The great black wolf moved among them slowly, touching noses, exchanging silent messages in ways she now understood were far more complex than they appeared. These were not the shifters who had come for him. These were the wolves who had raised him, who had protected him when no one else had. They could not follow him now. This forest was their world. Watching them, something inside Tessa tightened unexpectedly. Another goodbye. Another piece of life left behind. Rhea came to stand beside her. "He has chosen you as his mate," she said calmly. "You understand what that means." Tessa nodded slowly. Among shifters, the bond was not arrangement or duty. It was something deeper, formed through instinct and choice, sealed through trust and connection. "I understand," she said softly. "But does he?" Rhea smiled faintly. "He understood long before you did. The moment you saved that pup, the wolf in him knew. For him, it was never a question. Only certainty." Her gaze softened. "And you?" Tessa took a breath, steadying herself. "I was raised where marriage meant power, not love," she said. "I ran from that life. I never expected to find something real in its place." Her eyes found Khan again. "I don't know what comes next, but I'm certain of him." Rhea nodded. "Then you are ready." Nearby, an older wolf stepped forward, pressing her head beneath Khan's jaw in a gesture of respect. One by one, the others followed, acknowledging him before turning away. Only Asher remained. The young wolf lingered, uncertain, watching. Khan approached Tessa, his body shifting fluidly until he stood before her in human form once more. "They understand," he said simply as she handed him his clothes. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Will they be all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Strong pack. New leader soon." His gaze shifted toward Asher. "But he comes." As if hearing, the young wolf stepped forward, nudging Tessa's hand. She smiled softly, running her fingers through his fur. "He's chosen you," Khan explained. "Young wolves sometimes leave." Tessa took a final breath, looking back once more, not just at the forest, but at everything she had been. A noble daughter. A promised queen. A life decided by others. "Ready?" Khan asked quietly. She looked at him, then forward. "Ready," she said, taking his hand. Together, they turned away, following Rhea toward a future unknown. Asher moved beside them, sometimes running ahead, sometimes returning, never straying far. Tessa did not look back again. That life had never truly been hers. This one, wild, uncertain, dangerous, was. And it was chosen. As they crossed beyond the borders of King Sohan's realm, Khan's fingers tightened around hers. No words were needed. What they shared existed beyond language, in touch, in presence, in the silent understanding between them. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges waited, that bond would remain, steady, unbreakable, guiding them forward like a light in the dark.